Another instance of police brutality in the United States, this time in the state of Arkansas. One suspect versus 3 trained police officers. What could possibly justify this level of force? One police officer pinned him to the ground, another punched his head, and the third drove his knees into him. This is not the case of a few bad apples. This is a systemic problem in American law enforcement. Police officers have way too much power. They're protected by powerful unions, by powerful politicians, and when they make a mistake, they face no consequences. Instead of reforming this system, politicians have thrown money at the problem. Today, the US policing budget is $123 billion. India's military budget is around $76 billion. How about that? $76 billion to handle rogue nuclear neighbors, $123 billion to handle unarmed shoplifters. How exactly does this make sense? Perhaps it's not supposed to make sense.
Andrea Velez released from federal custody tonight after not entering a plea in court today. Outside, the 32-year-old Cal Poly Pomona grad says she was wrongfully detained by federal agents.
It was just a day of work, and everything happened so fast. So yeah, and they didn't identify themselves, so I was kind of scared.
It was Tuesday morning in downtown LA. Her mom and sister had just dropped her off to her job and then watched as she was taken away in an unmarked car. And they say they fear she had been kidnapped.
She's a U.S. citizen!
She's lived her whole life. She's born at USC Medical Center. She's born in the USA.
Prosecutors allege during Tuesday's immigration enforcement, Andrea Velez stepped into an officer's path and extended one of her arms in an apparent effort to prevent him from apprehending a male subject he was chasing, and that Velez's outstretched arm struck that officer in the face.
A Lombard man faces hate crime charges here for allegedly threatening to shoot 2 Muslim men. It happened Tuesday at Point West condos. Police say the suspect, 46-year-old Larry York, swore at the victims, told them they did not belong in this country, then threatened to shoot them. The DuPage County State's Attorney says the allegations are extremely disturbing and that acts like these will not be tolerated.
There's supposed to be a distinction between the police and military. While the Army, Navy, and Air Force exist to protect us from foreign enemies, the police are supposed to keep the peace and serve their communities. Over time, this distinction has withered away as politicians give police greater and greater access to military weapons and perpetuate the idea that we, the American people, are actually the enemy. In 1981, the Military Cooperation with Civilian Law Enforcement Agencies Act created a cooperative relationship between the military and domestic law enforcement, specifically targeting drug enforcement and civil unrest. Section 1033 of the National Defense Authorization Act, first created in 1997, allows police to procure and use tanks, automatic weapons, and other gear traditionally reserved for active warfare. Research from the American Civil Liberties Union has found that these policies disproportionately impact minority communities.
The wars didn't end. They just changed addresses. We built for war. We profited from war. We invented enemies to keep the machine running. But when the wars overseas got too expensive or too unpopular, we didn't stop. We just redirected the machine inward. See, every empire reaches this moment. The moment when it turns on its own people. And here we are. This is the final chapter of the American War Machine series. And no, we're not talking about Baghdad, Kabul, or Saigon anymore. We're talking about Ferguson, about Standing Rock, Portland, Minneapolis, Uvalde, East Palestine, the Texas border, your local school board meeting. We're talking about what happens after the battlefield goes quiet abroad and the war makes our way back home. For decades, this country spent trillions fighting endless wars in the name of freedom. We militarized everything, our budgets, our foreign policy, our culture. And eventually we couldn't tell the difference between a war zone abroad and a protest at home. Don't believe me? Ask the people who were tear gassed in Lafayette Park so a president could take a Bible photo. Ask the water protectors at Standing Rock, hit with rubber bullets, hosed down in freezing weather on their own land. Ask the teachers who walk into classrooms with bulletproof backpacks and active shooter drills, while the Pentagon offloads surplus military gear to local police departments for pennies. Ask immigrants caged in ICE facilities that look more like prisons than processing centers. Ask Black Americans who see a tank roll down their street, not in Iraq, but during a traffic stop protest in their own neighborhood. This is not a glitch in the system. This is the system, guys. It's the same war machine we built for foreign enemies, now being turned inward for domestic control. Why? Because a machine built to dominate doesn't know how to de-escalate. It doesn't know how to educate or care or serve. It only knows how to enforce, suppress, and extract. And when it runs out of wars abroad, it turns on the people it was supposed to protect. Us. Today's episode is not just about soldiers and generals. It's about school districts applying for federal defense grants. It's about drones over the southern border. It's about facial recognition tech used at protests. And predictive policing software targeting Black and brown neighborhoods. It's about how the war machine rebranded itself as quote-unquote public safety, as national security, as order. But here's the truth. Order doesn't mean justice, and peace doesn't mean silence. The truth is, we've been so focused on who we fight overseas, we forgot to ask ourselves what happens when that same militarized mindset comes back home. When every protest is a potential riot, when every undocumented person is a potential threat, when every student is a suspect, every teacher a liability, every journalist an enemy of the state, you don't have to drop bombs to wage war. You can cut funding, arm the police, criminalize dissent, and call it protection. That's the American model now. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just look around. The surveillance cameras, the metal detectors, the SWAT raids, the armored trucks in school zones, the riot shields next to school buses. This is what it looks like when the war machine comes home. So today, in our last episode, we traced the domestic blowback, the policy, the profit, the propaganda that turns soldiers into cops, classrooms into battlegrounds, and borders into war zones. We're unpacking what it means to live in a country where the battlefield isn't somewhere else anymore. It's here, it's now, and it's us. Welcome to episode 4 of the American War Machine, the war that came home.
Last summer's protests were overwhelmingly peaceful. Over 96% of them had no property damage at all. Even more had no reported injuries. But Republicans in high places told a different story, with plenty of name-calling.
We have Antifa, we have anarchists, we have terrorists, we have looters.
I hope state and local authorities will work quickly to crack down on outside agitators and domestic terrorists.
Let's see how these anarchists respond when the 101st Airborne is on the other side of the street.
1 year on, some GOP lawmakers have a new tactic for handling protests, by making parts of them a crime. In just 2021, GOP lawmakers in 32 states have introduced over 80 anti-protest bills. The bills vary in approach and in just how much they chip away at the First Amendment. Most propose new or harsher penalties. A bill in Alabama could give up to 10 years in prison for inciting a riot. But the language is so broad, it could be applied to someone who handed out water to protesters. One in Minnesota would make it so anyone convicted of illegal conduct at a demonstration would be unable to get food assistance, unemployment, or student loans. Some target protests that block traffic. A bill in Oklahoma would make willfully blocking a street punishable by up to 2 years in prison. A few address different types of protests. 5 states have proposed limiting demonstrations at oil pipelines. Others aim to protect police, or at least their feelings. A bill in Ohio could make it a crime to taunt a cop. A couple go after elected officials. One in North Carolina could give a mayor up to 30 days in jail for publicly encouraging cops to respect the rights of protesters. And then there are the bills in 11 states, trying to give immunity to motorists who run over protesters, as long as the driver was exercising, quote, due care. Now,
you ever heard the saying, when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail? Yeah, that's a classic. But here's the remix that fits our country. When you build your entire national identity around war, every challenge starts to look like a battlefield. And every person who pushes back, suddenly they're an enemy combatant. Now let's back up for a second. Because if you listen to episode 1, you know we talked about how America built itself for war. Financially, industrially, politically. But what we didn't talk about yet is what happens when that war machine runs out of places to go. Spoiler, it doesn't shut down. It turns inward. Let's start with a little history. After World War II, the United States made a conscious decision to stay on a permanent war footing, even in peacetime. And it wasn't subtle. In 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower gave his now famous farewell address warning us about what he called, and I quote, the military-industrial complex. Here's the full quote. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. He wasn't talking about hypotheticals. He saw it coming. This fusion of government, defense contractors, and war as business. And guess what? We didn't listen. By the time Vietnam ended in the 70s, did we demilitarize? Nope. We upgraded. New toys, new tactics, new enemies. But the logic stayed the same. We spent the next 5 decades pouring hundreds of billions into surveillance tech, crowd control, predictive policing, counterinsurgency training, all under the guise of fighting terrorism or keeping the peace. And what do you do with all that gear when the war ends? You use it at home. Let me say that again. You use it at home. So according to the Defense Logistics Agency and the SCLU, over $7.4 billion worth of military gear has been transferred from the Pentagon to local police departments since the 1990s under the 1033 program. That's why your town's police department has MRAPs, so mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, designed for Afghanistan. Not potholes, not parades, not peaceful protests, but they are parked outside city halls and roll out for Black Lives Matter demonstrations. And here's where it gets real disturbing. We didn't just militarize law enforcement, we militarized education, health, and governance. Unions are treated like enemy cells. Peaceful protest is labeled insurrection, and school boards are on watch list. Let's talk about that for a second. In 2021, the National School Boards Association wrote a letter to the Biden administration asking for federal assistance to deal with what they call threats of violence at school board meetings. And the DOJ responded by launching investigations into what they frame as domestic extremism. Now, was there some wild behavior? Sure. But what happened next? Conservatives weaponized that moment to cry authoritarianism. Liberals quietly backed the state using counter-terror tools on parents. Both missed the bigger point. We are so militarized, we don't know how to handle disagreement without force. Let's keep going though, because if this was just about equipment, that will be one thing. But it's about the culture. We train generations to serve and protect, but we never untrain them when the mission changed. After 9/11, police forces across the country started getting trained in counterterrorism, not community safety, not de-escalation, not mental health support, counterterrorism. So what happens when a 15-year-old with a protest sign stands in front of cops trying to see every gathering as a potential insurgency? They don't see a citizen, they see a threat. And here's some parallels. In the 1960s and 70s, COINTELPRO, the FBI's counterintelligence program, the COINTELPRO, whatever, was launched to monitor and infiltrate civil rights groups, anti-war organizers, and student movements. Martin Luther King Jr., Angela Davis, the Black Panthers, even teacher unions. They were all labeled subversives or subversives. Same pattern today, though. The only difference is that now the tools are faster, cheaper, and more digital. Facial recognition, geofencing, warrants, social media scraping, and all of it's legal. Because the war on terror gave law enforcement a blank check. Let's not forget, every time the American people demand justice, dignity, or democracy, the government meets them with helmets, tear gas, and SWAT teams. Let's get examples. Occupy Wall Street in 2011, pepper sprays and baton beatings. Standing Rock 2016, water cannons and LRADs. George Floyd protests 2020, tear gas in 100+ cities, curfews enforced by National Guard, journalists shot with rubber bullets. And then the ICE protests just recently, journalists shot, rubber bullets, all that. And this is in theory. This is practice. And then according to the SCLED, Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, over 93% of the George Floyd protests were peaceful. But police escalated in 54% of the cases where violence did occur. Translation: peace wasn't the problem. The response was. Police made it more violent. So let's recap. We built a country designed to conquer. But instead of conquering land now, we conquered dissent. We've militarized every corner of the civilian life. Schools, protests, workplaces, airports, borders. And the scariest part, it just feels normal now. We've been conditioned to accept that warlike response to every social issue. Poverty, call it a criminal. Drug addiction, call it a crime. Protest, call it a threat. Education, frame it as indoctrination. And because the solution is always force, we never build anything better. Here's what Eisenhower warned us about in 1961, and I quote, "Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals." But let's be honest, we haven't been alert. We've been pacified, distracted, and divided. And now the hammer's swinging right at us. So ask yourself, what kind of country surrounds free speech zones with metal fences? What kind of country trains police officers like Marines but underfund their social workers? What kind of country treats a protest like a war zone? Our kind. Unless we do something about it, I don't know what else we can do. And this was the way waging peace like over. And up next, we'll look at how surveillance, border militarization, and predictive policing became the new battlefronts of the American war machine. And why they're not coming for the enemy. They're coming for us.
A man is now free following his arrest in Florida after he was detained at the request of immigration authorities. The state's highway patrol arrested 20-year-old Juan Carlos Lopez Gomez on Wednesday after a traffic stop. He was arrested for crossing into Florida illegally, then placed on a 48-hour hold for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The problem is Lopez Gomez is an American citizen who was born here in Georgia. He was traveling to Florida to work on a construction site in Tallahassee. A Leon County judge authenticated his birth certificate Thursday, and he was later released.
Reports of U.S. citizens being detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement have been circulating. I'm Veronica Morley, your senior reporter. Local attorneys are now sharing advice about what you can do and what your legal rights are should you be approached by ICE agents. Have you seen the reports of U.S. citizens being detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement?
Yes, not just this week.
In Kern County, concerns are growing amid reports of U.S. citizens being detained by immigration officials during the Los Angeles raids.
Even a U.S. citizen has the right to remain silent. They have the right to not share information. They have the right to ask to speak to an attorney.
Amber Tovar with the UFW Foundation says ICE has no jurisdiction over U.S. citizens, but detainments still happen when agents believe there is reasonable suspicion that someone is undocumented. She said oftentimes that means
it's because of their color of their skin. It's somebody who is brown, is looking like they might be, working as, let's say, as a gardener. They might be documented, they might be a U.S. citizen, but they fit a certain profile.
Let's go back for a second. In episode 2, we exposed how the American war economy was never about ending conflict. It was about maintaining it. We don't win wars. We feed off of them. We built an entire economy where war is the product. The goal isn't peace. It's motion, it's turnover, it's profit. And once it got too expensive and too unpopular to keep that war going overseas, they didn't shut it down. They brought it home. We were told the war was over. We pulled the troops out. We closed the bases. Some of them. We said, mission accomplished. Again. But here's the truth. War is a business. And business didn't stop. It just moved. Not in desert bunkers or foreign villages. Not in Baghdad, nor Kandahar. But here. In our cities, in our schools, in our digital lives. And now, the war machine has a new set of targets. You, me, our kids, our classrooms, our phones, our protests, and our possibility. Let's talk numbers real quick, because this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is public record. In 2025, the US government spent over $130 billion in contracts not for foreign defense, but for domestic control. These include surveillance tech, border militarization, private detention facilities, predictive policing software, AI and facial recognition systems, data mining of American citizens. Let that sink in. That's more than the GDP of over 100 countries. All spent to monitor, track, predict, and control you. This is the new war. It doesn't need boots on the ground anymore. It needs servers, it needs satellites, it needs silence. Because silence is cheaper, and surveillance is scalable. Now, let's go with some names. Let's start with Palantir Technologies. And if you have heard it, it's the big deal right now on the news. They're backed by the CIA's venture capital arm in Quitel. Palantir helped build the post 9/11 surveillance infrastructure that was supposed to fight terrorism. Now, they repurposed that infrastructure to fight you. Palantir has contracts with ICE, Homeland Security, HHS, local law enforcement, public school systems, child welfare agencies. They're not just tracking immigrants. They're analyzing school attendance, unemployment data, housing instability. They're building risk profiles on communities. Because in the war machine's eye, poverty is a threat vector. And this is a quote from a journalist by Kashmir Hill from the New York Times. And I quote, "We've reached a point where surveillance is a feature of everyday life, not a deviation from it." Now let's go with Clearview AI. And this one's terrifying. And you thought that Palantir was bad enough? This one is pretty bad. Clearview scraped over 30 billion images off the internet. Not permission, no oversight. They fed your face, your grandma's face, into a system used by hundreds of US police departments, ICE, Border Patrol, private security firms, even retail chains tasting shoplifting prediction AI. They pitched this as a solution to crime, but the first people they tested it on? protesters, journalists, immigrants, black kids, teachers. Here's a thought. If your so-called public safety software always gets beta tested on poor people and protesters, then maybe it's not about the safety at all. Maybe it's about profit. Let's go with the third one, GEO Group and Core Civic. Once again, of the private prison boom, these companies didn't die when incarceration started facing backlash. They adapted. They moved into youth detention, ankle monitors, re-entry services, immigrant detention, and app-based tracking. Their entire business model is about turning human desperation into recurring monthly revenue. In 2024, GEO's profit from domestic contracts alone jumped 19% after ICE renewed its detention deals. Their stocks soared after the Afghanistan withdrawal because investors knew the war was moving inland. And then this, according to the Brennan Center, over 1 in 3 Americans now live in areas covered by predictive policing. Over 70% of public schools use real-time behavioral surveillance, and more than 80 United States cities are now piloting the smart policing partnerships with private tech firms. Let's stop for a second and talk about schools. Because when you militarize a school, you're not preparing kids for education. You're preparing them for compliance. In Springfield, Massachusetts, a company called Evolve Technologies installed AI threat detection scanners in public schools. They claim it was to stop school shootings. But in the first 90 days, not one weapon was found. Instead, 900 plus students were flagged for, and here it goes, lingering too long to near exits, erratic hand motion, excessive eye contact with camera sensors. And guess who got flagged most? Black kids, neurodivergent kids, low-income kids, kids who just don't perform normal enough for a damn algorithm. And this is a quote from Shoshana Zuboff, author of The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And I quote, "Surveillance is no longer the means to an end. It is the end. It's the product, the business model, the point." Now let's go to the border. This is where the war machine runs wild. Today, CBP has more drones than the US Air Force had in 2001. And they are not watching the Rio Grande. They are flying over the apartment complexes, high schools, churches, and protests. In 2024, CBP conducted 300 plus drone flights inside the United States cities. Their excuse, operational flexibility. My name for it, domestic occupation. And then even the former DHS Secretary Tom Ridge said, and I quote, "The infrastructure we built to monitor terrorists is now regularly used on US citizens. We crossed that line quietly and quickly." And all of it, every camera, drone, facial scan, ankle monitor, sentiment algorithm, it all costs money. Huge, big money. You want to know who won the war on terror? Of course, your all favorite Raytheon, Booz Allen, Palantir, Clearview, GEO. You want to know who paid for it? You did. Every paycheck, every tax season, every time your Wi-Fi pings another invisible eye in the sky. James Baldwin once wrote, and I quote, "The most dangerous creation of any society is the man who has nothing to lose." And when you surveil people, suppress them, criminalize protests, sell off justice to the highest bidder, you create a generation that has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. So here's the truth. The war didn't stop. The battlefield just changed. And the contractors, they didn't lose money when Kabul fell. They just pivoted. Now the battlefield is digital. The targets are domestic, and the profits still rolling in. You are the product. You are the enemy. You are the test subject. Unless you resist. In the next segment, we dig into the US border as a training ground for war profiteers, biometric tyranny, and privatized cruelty. The war machine didn't retreat. It rebranded. Let's talk about how he used immigration policy to test his next weapon. Silence.
Donald Trump in 2020 was very critical of the Black Lives Matter movement. And
I don't think so. I didn't see any of that. I think, I never saw that. I've heard that before, but you'll have to prove that one to me because I never seen that. He actually did so much for the black community.
No, I'm saying he was critical of the Black Lives Matter movement.
I was too. What kind of crap was that?
Well, he's inviting them now. He wants their support, and he's saying that.
Wouldn't he? Well, you know what? Most of them will come over because they got lied to about the Black Lives support. They didn't get any money that Joe Biden promised. None of that went towards what their cause. And they were out there burning down buildings, killing people, robbing people. Who would want to support them then? And maybe they changed their attitude. Maybe that's why he invited them on. Maybe they got sense now.
What do you feel about January 6th in that light?
I think when you are at the White House and you have police officers asking you to come in and showing you the way, they did. Come on in. Come right in here. And I think that man that shot that lady and killed her, he needs to be in jail right now. I think it's ridiculous to have our boys still in prison for what they believed in. It would have been a simple protest, but the people that weren't there caused that. They were. I watched it. Come on in.
Perhaps the most exciting of all is the fact that every single day, the entire White House staff, the entire administration, the entire cabinet, on behalf of President Trump and his extraordinary leadership, is getting the lies out of our schools, the men out of women's sports, the poison out of our foods, the woke out of our military, the predators off our streets, and the illegal aliens the hell out of our country. It's happening. It is happening. Every day under President Trump, he is saying hell no to DEI. He is saying hell no to CRT. He is saying hell no to the indoctrination of our children. And is saying hell yes to the idea that America belongs to Americans.
So here's the question. What happens to a country that defines itself by its enemies? When the enemies run out? The answer? It turns on itself. Because after 70 plus years of Cold War politics, war and terror propaganda, and red, white, and blue bootlicking nationalism, we forgot how to belong to each other. We don't see neighbors anymore. We see threats. We were taught to fear outsiders. Russians, Afghans, Iranians, then immigrants, Muslims, protesters, journalists, trans kids, teachers. And now, if you question the system, you become the enemy. Historian Richard Slockton once wrote, and I quote, "A nation that defines itself through violence must constantly invent enemies to justify its identity." And we did. Boy, we did. We've invented enemies for every generation. In the 50s, communists. In the 60s, civil rights activists. In the 70s, anti-war hippies. In the 80s, welfare queens. In the 90s, gangs and urban decay. In the 2000s, Muslim and terrorists. 2010s, immigrants and refugees. And now, protesters, trans kids, librarians, you name it, and immigrants now. And the machine just keeps going. And this didn't happen by accident. It was designed, marketed, and funded. The Pentagon spends nearly $1 billion a year on military recruitment and PR, just domestically. That's not combat spending, that's marketing, that's propaganda. And they fund Hollywood scripts, TikTok influencer deals, NFL halftime shows, school assemblies, JROTC programs in 3,000 plus high schools. You think it's about defense? Nah, it's about the control. Now let's talk about that. In over 40% of United States high schools, students can enroll in JROTC, Junior Reserve Officer Training Course. It sounds voluntary, right? Not always. In Chicago, LA, and Houston, thousands of students were automatically enrolled in JROTC without their consent. And these programs disproportionately target black and brown students, immigrant-heavy districts, low-income schools with no arts, no nurses, and no counselors. Why? Because if your school doesn't have funding for your future, they'll teach you how to die for your country instead. This is a quote from retired Colonel Andrew Basevich, West Point graduate and historian. And I quote, "Militarism has replaced citizenship. Obedience has replaced critical thinking. We don't raise citizens anymore. We raise soldiers." Now, let's zoom out. It's not just about military uniforms in high schools. It's about how we define who gets to be a real American. Because this country has weaponized patriotism. We turned the flag into a loyalty test. We've turned the anthem into a surveillance tool. And we've turned criticism into betrayal. And the result? We now confuse obedience with belonging. Let me paint you a picture. A black teen walks into a store with a hoodie. Suddenly, he's a threat. A Muslim woman wears a hijab on the subway. And then people move away. A trans student uses the restroom. And the school board calls an emergency meeting. A family walks through the desert asking for asylum. And we send troops to the border. Drones in the sky, razor wire in the sand. Why? Because we've been trained to see differences as dangers, to see visibility as violence, to see survival itself as an act of rebellion. Here's a survey. 48% of Americans believe that questioning the military or the flag is unpatriotic. Among Republicans, it jumps to 71%. 71%. That's not patriotism, guys. That's indoctrination. This is from the Pew Research in 2024. And this is a quote from Howard Zinn. And I quote, "Dissent is the highest form of patriotism." But we flipped the script. Now dissent is treason. Now teaching history is radical. Now taking a knee during the anthem gets you blacklisted. And waving the flag, that's a free pass to violence. Remember January 6th? American flags, thin blue line flags, Trump flags. And people still say it was just a protest. Meanwhile, if you kneel for racial justice, you are an enemy of the state. Let's talk about belonging. Because what does belonging mean in a country that criminalizes your existence? You think undocumented immigrants feel like they belong? You think Muslim families who've been spied on for decades feel included? You think trans kids banned from bathrooms feel safe? Of course not. They are told to be quiet, be grateful, and disappear. And this isn't new. The US has always linked patriotism with conformity. In World War I, thousands of people were arrested under the Espionage Act just for opposing the draft. In World War II, we put Japanese Americans in camps while selling war bonds on the name of liberty. In the 50s, McCarthyism blacklisted teachers, artists, and civil servants for alleged un-American activities. In the 2000s, if you were Muslim and say the word Palestine in public, you were probably on a no-fly list. James Baldwin, again, because he never misses, quote, said, "I love America more than any other country in the world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." But today, if you criticize the system, you're labeled an extremist. If you want police reform, you're called anti-American. If you fight for inclusive schools, they're saying you're grooming kids. This isn't a debate. This is war on identity, militarized belonging. And let's land on this. We've spent generations teaching kids to die for their country, but we never taught them how to live in it. We replace empathy with obedience. We replace truth with loyalty. And we replace freedom with fear. And we wonder why our country feels like a battlefield now. And this is from Angela Davis, and I quote, "We have to talk about liberating minds as well as liberating society. Because the war is no longer just physical. It's psychological. It's cultural. It's spiritual. And until we stop teaching kids that American pride means unquestioning obedience, we will keep raising generations who see difference as danger and patriotism as permission to silence." With that, coming up next in our next segment, we talk about the permanent emergency mindset, how this country has locked itself in a state of constant crisis. where fear justifies force to disaster becomes a policy tool. From the Patriot Act to COVID crackdowns to border militarization, fear has become the fuel. And the government has no plan to pump the brakes. Because in America, emergency is the business model. Let's break that down next.
This was an extraordinary move. The activation of National Guard over the objections of the state governor, and then the deployment of several hundred Marines. So it struck me, as somebody who's been covering the military now for 35 years, as something to really take note of and watch carefully. One of the main questions is it legal? The state of California has already now gone to court and sued the federal government, basically saying this is an illegal deployment, that the state and city authorities have the ability to deal with this unrest right now, and they don't need the American military. There's a 1878 law called the Posse Comitatus Act that basically prevents, almost in all cases, U.S. military forces from engaging in domestic law enforcement. But that can be put aside if the president invokes another early 1800s law called the Insurrection Act. That act was basically devised to help repel foreign invaders. The president so far has not invoked the Insurrection Act. The Pentagon has basically used a rationale using something called Title 10. And this is a little used provision of Title 10 to allow National Guard and these Marines to provide support on the ground without actually conducting any kind of policing action. And of course, the big question still remaining is, will he cross the line and invoke the Insurrection Act and give the military law enforcement powers on the ground itself? The last time the Insurrection Act was invoked was in 1992 by President George H.W. Bush after the riots in Los Angeles there, basically in response to requests from the then governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles, and much more violent, widespread damage and loss of life than at least what we've seen in these last couple of days in Los Angeles. But the president has made it clear that if unrest spreads to other cities, he could have some kind of military deployments elsewhere.
You know, if we didn't attack this one very strongly, you'd have them all over the country. But I can inform the rest of the country that when they do it, if they do it, they're going to be met with equal or greater force.
So there's a lot of concern about where does this lead? Is Los Angeles a test case for something the president really has been wanting to do since his first administration, and that is use the military in a much more aggressive and wide-focused way on dealing with both civilian protests on the ground, but also when it comes in conjunction with his immigration efforts, be they inside of the cities or down on the southern border.
All right, by now the pattern is obvious. We built for war, we profited from war, we redirected war for home. And we taught people that patriotism means obedience. But here's the next chapter in that story. And maybe the most dangerous part. We didn't just bring the weapons home, we brought the logic home. The logic of war, the logic of emergency, the logic that says fear justifies power. This country is not operating like a democracy. It's operating like a military command center. We're not living in a peacetime. We're living in permanent emergency. And that's not a metaphor. That's policy. Because as of 2025, the United States has 39 active national emergency declarations. 39. Some of them that are older than I am. Some date back to the 1970s. Most of them Congress hasn't reviewed in decades. And every single one of them gives the president extraordinary authority with almost zero oversight. This isn't democracy, it's governance by crisis. It's war logic, just wearing a tie and a suit. And this quote from Elizabeth Gautier and Brennan Center for Justice, and I quote, "The president can invoke more than 100 emergency powers simply by signing his name to a declaration. And once declared, these powers stay in effect until explicitly revoked," which almost never happens. Let's break it down. What can a president do under a national emergency? Freeze private assets, deploy military troops inside the United States, suspend regulations, reroute billions of dollars, take over communication networks, restrict movement and assembly, monitor citizens without a warrant. And they don't need a war. They don't need Congress. They don't even need a good reason. Just say the war emergency and the machine kicks on. And here's the thing. These emergency powers were never meant to be permanent. They were supposed to be used in rare, urgent, time-limited situations. But we weaponized them. We normalized them. We've turned them into a governing strategy. Because when you rule through fear, you don't need consent. You just need control. Don't believe me? Let's go over to case study number 1. The 9/11 emergency, and is still active. It's been 24 years since the attacks on the World Trade Center. But the emergency powers activated that week, they're still active. Under the 2001 Authorization of Use of Military Force, AUMF, presidents have justified global drone strikes, indefinite detentions at Guantanamo Bay, mass warrantless surveillance, military action in 19 countries, targeted assassinations of American citizens abroad. All without declaring a new war, all under one piece of paper. The AUMF has outlived bin Laden. It's outlived Bush, Obama, Trump, the presidencies. It's a zombie law. In Congress, they're too cowardly to repeal it. Like Senator Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut in 2023 said, Congress outsourced war powers to the executive for a generation. And every year we let that continue. We lose more of our democracy. Didn't do anything. In case number 2, the border emergency. This is the best one. In 2019, Trump declared a national emergency to bypass Congress and build his border wall. The justification, and you probably heard this, it was an invasion. That war triggered military authority. He redirected $3.6 billion from the Pentagon. He deployed troops to the southern border. He waived 41 environmental laws, all without congressional approval. That emergency should have ended in 2021. But under Biden, the wall contracts continue. So did the surveillance. So did the drone flights and facial recognition checkpoints in border towns. Because once emergency powers are in place, presidents don't give them up. They just rename them. And this is from a Harvard professor, Juliet Kayyem. And I quote, "What was once a legal exception has become a routine method of governance. It's easier to operate under crisis than collaboration." Let's go to our next case. And this is case study number 3, COVID-19 and the pandemic state. When COVID hit, emergency declarations at the federal and state level triggered hundreds of new powers. Eviction bans, mask mandates, travel restrictions, quarantine orders, economic relief reallocations. Some of that was necessary, don't get me wrong. But you know what else happened? AI contract tracing system was with no oversight. School surveillance tech with facial recognition for help. ICE using pandemic data to track undocumented people. Military patrols in civilian sites. We were told this is just temporary. But ask yourself, what stayed? The biometric checkpoints at airports? Stayed. Corporate tracking of medical data? Stayed. Predictive risk software in schools? Check. And telemedicine surveillance? Also stayed. Once the infrastructure exists, they don't uninstall it, they just upgrade it. So here's the real point. Emergency in the United States is not about a pause button. It's a business model. It allows the government to suspend rights, shift power, and funnel billions to private contractors without any public debate. And because it's quote-unquote temporary, they don't need to justify it long term. They just keep it going. Let's go even deeper. There are currently over 120 statutes that the president can invoke during a declared emergency. Many of them haven't been reviewed since the 1970s. And some allow the following: the arrest and detention of U.S. citizens without trial, control over domestic transportation, censorship of mail and communication, suspension of habeas corpus in border zones, secret appropriation for intelligence agencies. This isn't speculation, it is a written law. And legal scholar Bruce Ackerman from Yale Law School says, "We are closer to constitutional dictatorship than any generation before us. The legal mechanisms are already built." And that right there, that's the scariest part. We're not talking about tanks in the streets. We're just talking about legal paperwork. The word logic we use to justify Iraq and Afghanistan is now being used to govern Cleveland or Phoenix or just your local school board. Because crisis governance doesn't need blood, it just needs silence. And let's put this in a historical context. Emergency powers are how fascists rise. You don't believe me? Here we go. Hitler used the Reichstag fire to declare a permanent emergency. Franco in Spain used wartime decrees for 36 years. The Patriot Act became the American version of this playbook. We tell ourselves it can't happen here, but it's already happening. It's happening now. And then this is from author Arundhati Roy. Our freedoms were not taken all at once. They were taken in the name of safety, a silver at a time, until one day we woke up and they were gone. So where does this leave us? In a country that never leaves crisis mode because emergency is profitable, it's useful, it expands power, and it turns democracy into a performance. The Constitution says checks and balances. Emergency power says, maybe next year. And if we don't name it, if we don't fight it, this will be our forever state. Not just the forever war, but the forever emergency. So stick with me in our final chapter, The Reckoning. It's like, how do we respond when everything, identity, law, protest, peace has been militarized? What does real resistance look like now? What does peace demand? And how do we dismantle the war machine inside of us? Let's talk about the fight worth having. Next.
The mass firing of federal workers is starting to come into focus. A report out today says more than 62,000 U.S. government jobs were cut in February. That brought the overall job losses to 172,000, the highest total for any month since the pandemic. The Department of Government Efficiency, which is behind the firings, does not put out a complete accounting, but our teams here at CBS News have found that cuts by DOGE have affected at least 18 federal departments and agencies. The Social Security Administration said last Friday it is cutting about 7,000 workers. The Department of Defense announced plans to cut about 5,400 probationary employees. And in the most significant job reduction so far, an internal memo from the Department of Veterans Affairs revealed the VA plans to cut 15% of its workforce by the end of September. Carter Evans in Los Angeles spoke to a combat veteran who is worried about the impact of the VA cuts.
You know, these are my 2 meritorious service medals.
U.S. Army veteran Rob Ham was 18 when terrorists attacked on 9/11.
I remember watching it and just feeling like, whoa, this world has changed, and it's violent and scary.
And you felt like you needed to do something.
I did.
He served several tours in Afghanistan as a paratrooper and combat photographer. His unit, often close to highly toxic pits, used to burn waste.
I definitely had some chest stuff when I came back.
Are you worried that it might become an issue?
When I look at the statistics, the odds of me getting some kind of related cancer that I will need help from the VA is very high.
Ham had produced videos for the VA documenting medical professionals caring for cancer patients and treating homeless veterans.
Rolling back the level of employees that cover all of these different services is going to impact care, 100%.
Look, the VA was never perfect, and it will never be perfect.
A message posted on X by VA Secretary Doug Collins explained the massive layoffs authorized by DOGE would shrink the number of VA employees by 72,000.
We'll be making major changes, so get used to it.
Let me tell you where it hits me. Not in Washington, not in Kabul, not in a Pentagon budget meeting or a battlefield briefing. It hits me in the classroom, in the hallways of underfunded schools, in the stories of my students, and the silence they carry. That's where I feel the war. Because this is where it came home. I've seen it. Students getting pulled from class because they're having a panic attack. And the first response in a school cop and not a counselor. Kids enroll in JROTC before they can even vote. Recruiters visiting the lunchroom more often than a school nurse. Metal detectors at the entrance. No therapist past the front office. That's not preparation for success. That's just preparation for submission. We're training children to live in a war zone, even if they never leave their zip code. And this is the cost of coming home. The cost isn't just paid by soldiers. It's paid by kids whose schools look more like prisons. It's paid by teachers who are told to be disciplinarians instead of healers. It's paid by families whose sons and daughters come back from the military, wounded, ignored, invisible. Because the war machine doesn't just send people out to fight. It grinds them up when they return. And this is a fact. According to the Department of Defense, over 70% of U.S. military recruits come from households making less than $65,000 a year. In many communities, the military isn't a choice. It's a last resort. Why? Because college costs too much. Trade schools are underfunded. Jobs don't offer benefits. And recruiters are the only ones showing up. And this is from Noam Chomsky. And I quote, "If you want to keep people obedient, keep them desperate. And we'll build a pipeline of desperation." When I was in the Marines, I saw the pipeline firsthand. And now as a teacher, I see the beginning of it. I've had students tell me, "I'm going to enlist because I don't want to end up in jail. I just want to leave this neighborhood. I don't want my mom to worry about feeding me anymore." Those are not recruitment slogans. Those are survival strategies, guys. And that should break your heart. Now let's talk about the school to service pipeline. As of 2025, over 3,500 high schools in the US host JROTC programs. In at least 19 states, students were automatically enrolled in JROTC without their consent. In schools with high Black and Latino populations, recruiters are 4 times more likely to visit than in a majority white schools. And some of these students are 13 or 14 years old. That's not career exposure. That's grooming kids for war. Talk about grooming, all right? And this is a quote from a 17-year-old student in Houston. And I quote, "They tell you JROTC teaches leadership, but they also tell you it'll make boot camp easier. And if your school doesn't have clubs or sports, it feels like your only option." This isn't about patriotism. It's just policy failure. Now let's talk about what happens after enlistment. We tell young people, serve your country and we'll take care of you. But let's look at the numbers. According to the VA's 2024 annual report, 33% of veterans report symptoms of PTSD, myself included. Over 40,000 veterans are homeless or on any given night. The average wait time for a VA mental health appointment is 42 days. Same thing happened to me. And veteran suicide rates are 57% higher than the national average. I will be lying if I didn't say that I consider suicide in my life after the military. And yet, Congress still debates whether or not to expand VA funding, but never hesitates to pass a almost $900 billion defense budget that we already established. That money is not going to the military, it's going to contractors. We send kids off to war and bring them home to bureaucracy, indifference, and trauma. And this is a quote from Marine Corps veteran John Schultz. "We fought 2 wars for 20 years, but the real fight begins when you come home. And we're losing that fight because no one's paying attention." And let me tell you what I've seen. I've seen students return from Afghanistan looking older than me. I've seen veterans living out of their cars. I've seen men I serve with go silent, go missing, go to their graves. because they couldn't carry what they brought home. We taught them to fight, but not to feel. We taught them to survive war, but not to survive peace. And that war logic, it never left them. Because we bring war logic back into our civilian lives. It's why police departments are stocked with military equipment and military veterans. Why schools are run like training camps. Why we treat protests like an insurgency. Why black and brown boys are seen as threats before they're seen as students. Because we brought that war home without bringing any healing. You don't believe me? Example, in Uvalde, Texas, the same school district that failed to stop a mass shooting had previously received a military surplus gear from the freaking Pentagon. Rifle, tactical vest, surveillance tech. But they didn't stop the violence. They just trained to respond to it after it happened. This is the American model. React, militarize, repeat. And this is from Angela Davis. We have to talk about the meaning of safety, not just the illusion of control. And now let's talk about what this means for education. You know how many schools in high poverty areas have mental health counselors, trauma-informed care, culturally relevant curriculum? Very few. But they've got cameras in every hallway, AI behavior monitoring, armed officers on campus, zero-tolerance policies that lead directly to juvenile detention. I taught in these schools, guys. I still do. And this is the cost of coming home. Because when war becomes the framework for everything, every child becomes a suspect. This is personal. I've seen a teacher, I had to carry more than lesson plans. I had to keep kids from crying during a lockdown drill. I had to sit with a student whose brother died overseas after being told it was his duty. I have to explain a 15-year-old why no one will help his mom afford her diabetes meds. But we have money for new police SUVs. That's where the war lives now. In every injustice that feels normal. And this is a quote from Audre Lorde. There's nothing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. In this war, it touches everything. Race, class, health, school, gender, citizenship, mental health, poverty, hope. So what do? We remember that this wasn't inevitable. It was built. And what's built can be unbuilt. We teach kids to question, not to comply. We invest in healing, not punishment. We honor service not by waving a flag, but by ending the cycles that create the need for it. We fight for peace, real peace, the kind that feels like freedom, not surveillance, and the kind that makes us safe, not obedient. The kind that costs us something, but gives us everything in return. And this is from Martin Luther King Jr. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on a program of social uplift is approaching spiritual doom. It's something that Republicans never quote because it doesn't fit their narrative. And this is the word that came home. And now that you've heard it, what will you do about it? Will you name the war you see? Will you challenge the logic you've been taught? Would you choose peace, not as feeling, but as a fight? Because the war is still here, but so are we. And that means the fight is far from over. With that, class dismissed.
The thing that I find so grotesque and offensive about Musk, here is the richest man of the world on a massive ego trip and a massive power kick, taking it out on the poorest people in the world. And what you've got here is the weak being made weaker and the strong being made stronger, which of course is what Trumpism really is all about.
USAID was the largest development organization in the world. It was spending almost 50, 60 billion US dollars a year if you take into account all US spend. The announcement was that all USAID money stops on a dime, and then they've announced that all the staff are being fired. And if you look at the Africa bit, they have gone from literally thousands of staff working to Africa. Guess how many staff now will remain?
12.
12, exactly. 12 staff to oversee what was literally over $10 billion worth of annual funding into Africa. 12 people.
It's hard not to see this as an act of absolute barbarism, cruelty, economic vandalism, social, political vandalism, call it what you want. In Kenya alone, they reckon 40,000 people currently involved in aid and development will now lose their jobs. Americans have been funding refugee camps in Kenya, where 750,000 people are located from 19 different countries. The sort of MAGA people will say, oh, well, they can sort themselves out. This is a relationship that the United States has built up with these countries over decades.
This is my closing reflection of all this. This didn't have to be the plan. We could have chosen peace, not as quiet surrender, but as deliberate action. We could have built a country that invests in life, not war and death. We could have invested in hospitals, not jails, counselors, not metal detectors, speech, not surveillance, healing, but not harm. But our choices were simpler and darker. We chose fear. Fear of the other. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of asking questions. Fear of imagining something better. And every time we feed that fear with budgets, media, politics, and silence, we power the machine. And look what's happening in 2025. Congress just passed a razor-thin national security emergency package, giving the president veto authority over select bills in the name of urgent threats. In Texas, lawmakers are pushing a bill to install facial recognition cameras in all public schools, even after multiple studies show it disproportionately tagged black students. And a wave of 15 new JROTC contracts just landed in underfunded districts, right when funding for teachers and counselors are shrinking. Fear of foreign threats, fear of classroom chaos, fear of students asking the wrong questions, all feeding the same machine. And let me be clear, I do believe in JROTC. Service can be honorable, discipline can be empowering, leadership matters. But right now, it's been weaponized. It's a grooming pipeline, funneling students, especially kids without other options, into a military, long before they understand what that may cost. They're told it's about honor, tuition, benefits, career skills, but they're not told about PTSD or losing a limb. They're not, or maybe dying. And they're not told about VA waits. They're not told how many of their classmates might never come back whole or even home. We owe our young people more than that. And this is a call to every senator and Congress and president brainstorming a war resolution. If you believe in sending troops to fight, stand by your words. Be the first in line to enlist your kids. Or better yet, enlist yourself. Because if you're not willing to send your kids to fight for that war that you're pushing, then we should not be sending any American to fight for these wars. Let them see you wear the uniform you praise. If you want to ramp up surveillance in schools, step into a classroom first. Explain to students why their faces should be digital dossiers. If you tell us national emergencies are urgent, declare them with your own families in that danger zone. Take your daughters to the border wall you want to build. Step onto the streets you want to militarize. Let your decisions shape your daily life like ours do. Because if you send others to live in crisis you manufacture, you might just feel the cost. And this is from a quote from Representative Ilhan Omar. If we're going to fight wars, let's train for peace first. Let's fund schools before drones. Let's serve our communities before serving on foreign soil. Look, it's not hopeless. It's a choice. We can choose fear or we can choose courage. Imagine diverting just 10% of that defense budget to trauma-informed schools. Electing leaders whose children learn besides every other kid, not behind JROTC drills. Politicians who don't weaponize fear to get votes, but dare to ask, what if hope is the real threat? We could have chosen a country that builds peace, that listens when kids say, I just want to feel safe. That answers with hearts, not body cams or guns. We could have chosen health over bombs, harmony over hate, trust over the terror of the other. And this is for my veterans and teachers. If you return from war, your wounds are real. If you teach inside surveilled schools, you see the broken system every day, as I did. You know the cost. Your work matters. Your pain matters. Your voice must matter. We need you at the front lines, not as soldiers or police, but as leaders, teachers, healers, witnesses. So here's the truth I want to leave you with. The machine, the war machine, the prison machine, the fear machine, this can be dismantled. It's not easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. But together, we can name it. We can expose it. We can demand no more uniforms before counselors. No more cameras before books. We can build a country worthy of people who live in it. Because the permanent state of conflict, we don't have to pass it on. Let's choose peace. Let's build it in our schools, our politics, our futures. Because if we don't, we'll create a country of walls, weapons, suspicion. We already are. That not to our children, but to our loss. Pick courage. Pick healing. Pick belonging. We could have chosen peace. We could have been better than this. But greed took over. I want you to reflect on that. I want you to call your Congress people. They should be listening from you. We want better for our kids. I don't want my son to join the military unless he really wants to. Not because he has to, though. I serve, and every time someone asks me my time in the Marine Corps, I always say, it's something that I'm proud to have been part of. I miss my brothers and sisters, but I do not miss what it did to me. It is something that it's a hard decision. And it's something that the stuff that many people in the Marines and military have seen and done is something that I don't want my son to deal with, ever. I want my son to go to college. Well, in whatever he wants to do. I want him to be peaceful. I want a better life for him. That's what we want for our kids. But our politicians don't care about our kids. They just care about their bottom line. And in this last 4 episodes, we exposed all of that. We went from how religion is used to to create wars. How wars are just propaganda. How we need war for politicians and contractors to build our stock portfolio and profit. And we expose how the American war machine, once they're done using us, they let us rot. And we expose the funding, how much funding there goes to the military budget. It's not a secret, but the message that we need to, that all that money goes to actual military and veterans is not true, as we exposed that in our series. And I want you to consider that. I want you to call them. Tell them, if you're really going to push for a war, then they need to be the first ones in line telling their kids to enlist. Because if they're not, then we know the truth, that they're hypocrites and they just want money. So I just want to say, thank you for listening for this series. We will create a new series coming up. And this was the American War Machine. And then I want you to say, let's go build what could have been. Until next time.